Thanks everyone for coming back after the break. I'm really glad you are here with me. And in this blog, we are going to talk about recruiting front-end developers, all right? How can you, recruiters, recruit front-end developers? We will follow the same structure as we did a while ago. So we will talk about who are the front-end developers, who are these guys? Then what technologies do they use? We need to know what technologies do they use so we can recruit them eventually, right? So where to source them? Where are these guys? What communities are they part of? Next, how to attract them? We again need to know about the technologies they use so we know how to attract these guys. Based on the persona, we know how to attract them, right? It's like marketing eventually. How to recognize juniors and seniors? It happens really frequently that you are asked by a hiring manager to target either juniors or mid-years or seniors, all right? So we are going to look at these differences. What are the differences between juniors and seniors? What technology do they use, all right? And I prepared this flip chart during the break so we can discuss some of the technologies they use, right? And last but not least, how to interview front-end developers, how to assess them, what kind of questions can you ask during a discussion. And we usually like to practice this a little. So we either ask a few questions during a small talk, maybe you just meet someone during a hackathon or a meetup, and you need to have a few questions just ready immediately to use to make a meaningful small talk discussion. All right, so this is what we usually practice. This is what we are also going to go through. And obviously interview questions, like these questions that will help you assess the quality of the front-end developer. All right, so this is your next level. This is why we interview hiring managers, CTOs, and developers, because they share these insights, right? Like they are those who have most knowledge about hiring front-end developers in this case, right? So this will help you tremendously to know how can you attract and interview and eventually fill IT positions like this one, all right? And I usually like to look at a role on a scale. It could be a scale, say from a junior to a senior, or it could be based on the technologies they use. So say some roles are a little more hardcore, and by hardcore I mean a role that requires some hard skill. So say data science is really a hardcore role because a data scientist is required to have a deep understanding of math and statistics, right? So that's a hardcore role, and manual tester is not really a hardcore role, right? So just to differentiate this a little. And now, whenever I look at front-end development, well, first we need to lay down this foundation. Like, what is front-end, right? What is front-end? What is back-end? And what is storage? I usually like to talk about the three IT layers: front-end, back-end, and storage. By front-end, I mean what you as a user can see. It could be a website, it could be an application, it could be a mobile app or a desktop app, right? Like something that you can interact with. Back-end is usually something that the front-end interacts with. It could be some API or system, or it could be, like billing system, etc. Like something that processes data, from the storage. So we can say that the backend is an interface between the front-end and storage, right? So data are stored in storage. The data could be in MySQL database or there are lots of relational or non-relational databases. So that's storage. That's where data is stored. Backend is what helps the front-end in other ways interact with the storage. Okay. So now, who is the front-end developer? Well, it's a person who develops the front-end. They usually work with some technologies, with some tools, and I laid this down on a scale. So say this is my imaginary scale of hardcoreness. So in front-end development, like who is hardcore and who is not hardcore? And I usually like to look at this. It could be seniority, but the hardcoreness is also a function of the tools and the difficulty to use these tools. So say a web developer could be someone who is just starting his or her career in IT. I've seen developers who have been in marketing before. So say marketing, account managers, people who have managed Facebook ads or Google ads, and at some point in their career they wanted to go to the next level and maybe even create landing pages. So that's why I have here this cloud. Like one of the use cases could be just to create marketing landing pages. So a landing page that a user interacts with. These web developers usually use tools like WordPress, right? Like WordPress is used by 30% of all the websites out there, so it's a mainstream tool. Lots of developers use WordPress. WordPress is also built in PHP, so these two go hand in hand. Lots of developers start their career as PHP developers, and they usually just integrate a few plugins, right? So they could integrate WordPress plugins and connect them somehow. They can integrate already existing tools, so they can build websites using Wix platform or Square. Like there are lots of these website builders. We can look at a few examples if you'd like. I myself build websites using Website Builder, for example. So I can show you my website that is running on michaliuhas.com, and I can show you how to make it work really within 5 minutes. So that's why I'm saying anyone can be a web developer with some training. It takes some time, but by far not as much time as being a really hardcore front-end developer. So imagine a different use case, an e-commerce website with 1 million visitors, per month, who are coming and visiting the website to buy some products, right? So the company needs to optimize everything. They need to no longer use WordPress or some public free plugins, but they need to build their custom solution, something built in-house, and they invest lots of time and energy to make it really cool. So they use a different set of technologies, different set of tools. So these are usually seniors. They use JavaScript frameworks, for example, Angular or Vue or React, right? Like these are some of the popular front-end frameworks. They use CSS preprocessors, so for example Sass and Less. And I can also show you how easy it is to use HTML and CSS. Like it's really easy. I would even say it no longer makes sense to write to a job description. We require senior front-end developers to have knowledge of HTML and CSS. That just doesn't make sense, because who doesn't these days have knowledge of HTML and CSS on some level? They may not have working experience with Sass or Less. And for example, a web developer, a junior web developer who builds a website using WordPress, like he or she certainly would not have experience with Less or Sass or Go. Right? So this is how you can recognize senior front-end developers, and some other tools they use are, for example, APIs. So they are able to integrate APIs, or they also use Git to store the code they write to a Git repository, right? A Git repository on, for example, GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket. So this is how you can recognize front-end developers. And you immediately see a few questions that you can start asking during an interview, or even during a small talk, but especially during an interview, you can ask questions about how do they create websites. So, for example, we talked about building a simple website just a while ago, right? And this could be a great opening question, like, hey, we have this project. We need to build a simple landing page. How would you build it? What would you recommend? And the person could come and say like, hey, you know, we can just use WordPress, there are some free templates, or I can buy a Bootstrap theme for 30 euros. Well, that's also okay. It's the, say, easier way to do it. And some other developers may prefer to go really, like, say, hardcore with using some of these JavaScript frameworks. They can use Angular, React, Vue.js, some other, like there's so many. We actually cover all these frameworks in a different module. So if you would like to dive deeper, we can certainly dive deeper in a following session. All right. So I'll just cover it really briefly like this, and we can talk about details later on. Okay. So if you have any questions, please take some notes, and we will cover them afterward. All right. For now, I'll just focus on some of the other topics. Okay. So who are the front-end developers? Just keep in mind there could be a junior web developer or a senior front-end developer. It's never really black and white. Just recently, I was looking with a group of recruiters through a few profiles, and we've seen, for example, a web developer who had on his profile written, "I'm a web developer," but he had 10 years of working experience building websites. But as soon as you dive deeper, on his profile, you could see that different positions had written full stack developer. So even though in his title was written web developer, he had full stack developer written in his positions. So sometimes it may be confusing. You certainly need to ask these questions like, hey, how do you build websites? What tools do you use? Do you use Gulp? How do you use Gulp? Do you use SAS and LS? How do you use these preprocessors? If they don't know even about these preprocessors, well, then they are these junior web developers using some of these technologies like Bootstrap and those that I mentioned. Okay, so keep this in mind, and we can practice more questions later on. Okay, so how to attract them? Certainly, you can attract these developers if you know what they are interested in. So say the more hardcore front-end developer would like to work in a setup that has already implemented some of these new technologies. They like to work with JavaScript frameworks, right? So say it will be very difficult for you to hire someone who has already been working with Angular or React, and you suddenly tell the person, hey, I have a great opportunity, you'll be building landing pages using WordPress themes, right? Like, yeah, you can guess that person would not really be excited. So this differentiation will help you next time you talk to developers and you interview them. How to recognize juniors and seniors? You cannot really focus on the number of years of experience in front-end development, because developers like to shift, and sometimes they move from front-end development to back-end development, and that's completely okay. Sometimes they would like to be full-stack developers. Sometimes they say are full-stack developers for 3 years, and then they realize they don't like building APIs on the back-end, so they only focus on front-end. You know, everyone has different preferences, so don't focus only on the number of years they worked with a particular technology, but rather how they used it. So, for example, some of these preprocessors or these tools that help to automate some of these front-end tasks can be used just say on a very shallow level. For example, Gulp. Or I use Gulp when I adjust some of our other websites at Geekrecruiter, and I just use it on a very, very shallow level. So if you use me like, hey, what can Gulp be used for, then I can answer. If you ask me like, hey, do you use Gulp? I say, yeah, like I use Gulp. But you need to dive a little deeper and you ask me, how do you use Gulp? Like, what do you use it for? What were some of the use cases? And then you would realize that I really just scratched the surface with Gulp or SAS or LS or some of these front-end frameworks. And because I don't need anything more for my particular use case. But should I build an e-commerce website? You know, my knowledge of Gulp and SaaS and some other tools, front-end tools, would not be enough. Like I would not get hired. So that's why I would like to open this discussion about these tools and how can you use this knowledge, the knowledge that CTOs and hiring managers and IT directors have by default, and how can you use it to make solid recruitment decisions? Because at the end of the day, you need to become a little more helpful, right, to the hiring managers. You need to bring a little more value to the table, so you don't just pass job descriptions, but you are able to assess and you are able to comment a little, right? So you are able to look through the profile, ask better questions the candidate, and then add your point of view a little commentary, all right?